Hey everyone, it's Ivan, KidBadger.com, out here today for another gear review, and today we're talking sights. These guys right here by Ultradyne. I think largely today, when it comes to iron sights, they are kind of an afterthought, and people have honestly got away from even putting sights on rifles. Just running red dots or low power variables, things along those lines. Not to say you can't or shouldn't do that. I think you should, depending on your use case. i.e. if it's a range toy, then it doesn't really matter if your optic gets catastrophically destroyed, batteries die, something along those lines. If it is a gun that you're going to rely on for more than just playing at the range, you might want to have some sort of redundancy built into your weapon. So to that end, we end up with backup iron sights. I've had these for a while now, and they are flip-up sights. They are not fixed, which I do like, and I actually really like the fact that they fold down. So some sights, they will lock up, and then you have to do something mechanically to get them to lay back down, which definitely opens up the opportunity to destroy them, i.e. they get smashed against something, overwhelm whatever physical device keeps them up, and they get broken. These, if you end up banging into something, they'll fall back down. I do appreciate that. Depending on use case, you may want offset irons, i.e. they're gonna be out at about a 45-degree angle. So rather than having the weapon vertical, bring it here, be able to access your sights. I opted for these, even though they do make those offsets, in part just because one, use, have a lot of experience shooting like this versus this. Eventually I'll probably try some offsets, and it comes down to mounts. So most optics I've used on this have been in ScalarWorks mounts, really easy to take on and off. And honestly, my use case for this rifle isn't, hey, your optic catastrophically exploded, it needs to come off right this second. I mean, honestly, ScalarWorks mounts are pretty quick. There's some with just throw levers, maybe a little quicker, but ScalarWorks has done a good job for me, and they're lightweight. Back to these sights, how have I used them? I've used them a bunch. First time I used these sights was in the tactical games down in South Carolina at the decommissioned nuke facility, and they did a good job down there. There was one stage where you're supposed to shoot with irons, and rather than zero these through my optic, I zeroed them not through my optic. So when it came to that stage, undid my ScalarWorks mount, pulled my optic off, and went to it. For that stage, started, I forget, I think like farmer's carry, and then eventually go up went up to the 6th floor, and then ultimately to the 8th floor before going back down. And from both the 6th as well as the 8th floor, shooting down from a railing at about, I don't know, a good 200 yards or something like that, shooting IPSC targets. And yeah, that was the first time I used these in earnest, and they did amazing for me. I mean, granted I did my part, but these made it easy. Didn't drop a single shot. If you're unfamiliar with Ultradyne, they do something interesting. So with respect to kind of your regular iron sights, you have a rear aperture, circle, and you have a front sight post, square. So you will take that front sight post and you will center it vertically, horizontally in the rear aperture. And you're good to go. Basically put that sight post wherever you want to hit, there you go. So the brain is really good at kind of spatial things, i.e. centering things. That's why all the military rifles use rear peep sights. Brain's good at doing that. So Ultradyne has basically taken it a step further, using more and more circles that help you line them up. So with the rear aperture, the hood on it is basically a circle, and then inside the rear aperture is another circle. Front sight post is, again, circle, the hood around it, and then the actual front sight post, as it comes up, it's basically kind of a round ball with a circle through the middle of it. So you have 4 different concentric circles that ultimately the eye is lining up. And human brain's amazing, and it does it really quick and really easy. How do these work in practice? They do an amazing job. They simplify the process. So rather than having your eyes constantly moving back between focal planes, you literally look at your target, bring the weapon up, and you keep your target in focus, and you basically start lining up circles. So rather than having your target out of focus and trying to get a hard focus on your front sight post, literally look at your target. Occasionally, I will shift my focal plane, just making sure everything's lined up perfectly, but I think that's largely just because of experience and use with conventional iron sights and not quite trusting myself all the way with basically the concept of how these work. But if you do your part, they will definitely do their part. Additionally, back here, we actually can move them for different elevations, going from 200 or basically kind of 50, 200 yard zero, depending on how you want to zero these. And then they go up in 50-yard increments up to 600. I've used them basically out to about 400 just because of limitations of the range I was at, but they absolutely hold true. Here's shooting through some different yard lines. This right here is shooting at a 12 by 24 BC zone steel from AR 500 Target Solutions at 100 yards. Here is that same 12 by 24 steel out at 200 yards. And that same steel out at 300 yards. Not totally sure on the dimensions of that plate, but that right there is 400 yards up on that hillside. Going back to the science in the design, the idea of lining up circles, I really like it, and for me, it's intuitive and it works. I know I've talked with people, and actually I used to be a huge fan of the Troy backup iron sights with the HK style front sight. It's basically a hood. And with your typical like A2 front sight, you have those wings that go out, and it can be distracting, especially depending on sight radius. You may or may not see them. They may not be as distracting. But when they came out with the ScalarWorks sights, I remember actually asking, because one of the people that had or given input to those was Larry Vickers. And I'd asked Larry, I was like, hey, I know you had input on these. Why didn't you go with a rounded hood? Like, it seems like it draws the eye more, and which it does. And what he brought up was the issue of, well, yes, it does draw the eye. Those style sights, you are adjusting the front sight post independent of that hood. So the actual top of the front sight post is no longer in the center, depending on your adjustment for elevation. At which point, now the idea and concept of being able to quickly, rapidly line things up, circle in a circle, it's kind of moot at that point, because now it doesn't actually play out for you. Conversely, when you go to zero these, you actually zero the front sight, period. Like, everything is initially done zeroing the front sight, leaving basically elevation, being able to move through for your rear sight. And so you can adjust the windage over on the side, and then when it comes to actually adjusting the elevation, this whole piece moves. So you'll bring this down, rotate it, and then let it go back up. And when you let it go back up, it will ensure that the front sight post, or modified front sight post, is truly in the center of that front circle, making sure that as you start lining up circles, everything is actually lined up and concentric. Some people may be wondering, well, is it strong enough? Will it break? You know what? Everything will ultimately end up breaking. Are there more moving parts in this? I don't know, maybe a couple more than like kind of your more traditional folding backup iron sights. And maybe, I don't know, maybe you get dirt inside this front aperture, but maybe with your traditional sight, you get dirt inside the rear aperture. I don't know, you could go down the what if road, but for me personally, I've never had any issues with them. And every time I've flipped them up, they've absolutely performed. The only thing, well, I guess I will say, an issue, not necessarily with them, more with me with respect to maintenance, but because I take my guns on adventures all over the place, regardless of weather. It's raining right now. I don't always maintain my stuff the best. That's why I appreciate things that are either like stainless, anodized aluminum, stuff along those lines. I will say I do have some rust on here, but not really their fault. It's more of a end user maintenance side. I will say if you are of the mind, hey, I don't need iron sights, I have my low power variable and an offset red dot. 5-year battery life, good to go. And etch reticle, awesome. One thing I will say is, again, depending on use case, but I have definitely been places where because of weather, optics get fogged up, they get covered up, especially if you are in a situation where maybe you're moving from a vehicle, climate controlled, to an outside environment, and you pull your weapon with you. Boom, instantly fogged up. Iron sights, pretty hard time fogging them up. Just something to think about. Personally, these have done a good job for me, and even though it's definitely something relatively foreign from how I cut my teeth, i.e. hard focus, front sight posts, things along those lines, really intuitive, really easy to shoot, and they're pretty fun to shoot. If you get a chance to pick some up, I would encourage you to do so, and let me know how they do for you. If you want to pick some up, usually around, for a set of them, about 240 bucks. You can get them obviously straight through Ultradyne, as well as other places like Brownells or Shooting Surplus. But if you get some, let me know how they are for you. And as always, thanks for joining us at kitbadger.com. Look forward to seeing you next time.